I'm JJ Perez with Inside Runner Sports. That's Greg Lucas, San Antonio Express News, coming to you from Orlando, Florida, home of the Cure Bowl, where UTSA fell to Troy to close the 2022 season 18-12 in a kind of gritty, muddled up game for UTSA. Greg, the Roadrunners had trouble getting going offensively, and I guess we could just start right there. Um, Kind of a tough go about it offensively for UTSA all game long, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think the turnovers is probably where I would start in terms of that. And I don't think they moved the ball well necessarily on a play-to-play basis. I think they averaged less than 5 yards a snap, but it was the turnovers that I think cost them more than anything. And there was the one that Frank Harris underthrew, which we haven't necessarily seen in a while. And then I do think it was a bad decision on the one that really, I think, made a huge impact in the game because Troy went down and scored after that. It was a UTSA got inside the 10 and he threw an interception on a crossing pattern. I actually don't know if you listened to the Troy post game at all. I was still at the stadium when they finally got around to starting their press conference, and the defender on that play said that it was a similar play call to one that he had seen on the previous drive. And it was the play where Oscar caught the pass and fumbled eventually. And I didn't watch it back to see if he was right, but that's what he was thinking at the time. And so he sort of trailed Tyke on the drag route underneath and then dropped back to where Oscar was because he figured that's where Frank would go with the ball. And that's how he kind of slid in front of the route, almost like Frank didn't see him, because I think once Frank saw him take off with Tyke, he sort of counted him out on the play.
Right.
So those two interceptions were huge. I mentioned the fumble that Oscar had on the catch that he made over the middle. There was a strip sack in there. And then there was the weird play with Clifford Chapman, which you can slice that up any way you want. I'll be honest, I've given up on trying to figure out what any of the rules are, whether it's targeting or catches or whatever they say. If people get mad about it, then I'll ask after, but I don't want to pretend I can figure this out any better than anybody else, because it's been a nightmare for everybody for a long time trying to determine what is or isn't a catch or a fumble or a targeting or any of these things. So did you have a take on that play?
Yeah, that was a weird situation. Like, looking at it live, it obviously looked like some sort of a catch, but I guess there was a whistle blown or something, and Kalechi didn't make a play for the ball.
Yeah, Kalechi, like, haphazardly. I was going to say something else. I don't know if this is a PG show. He wasn't that into getting
Right.
the necessarily,
Yeah.
compared to the Troy guy who was very much going for it. And I guess Jeff Traylor said that there was a whistle, and that's why Kalechi wasn't as intent on grabbing it as Troy's player was. So whether that's true or not, I can't say. I felt like we had like no concept of the audio through the game, even in terms of like the referees,
Right. Right.
like the penalty calls. I felt like I was a step behind on. So the last person I would trust as somebody up in the box. I felt like we didn't have a good pulse of that, but maybe, I don't know if it was audible on TV or if we just have to take their word for it, but certainly that was something that they felt made an impact in that play. And that was a 23-yard swing of field position, I think, when Troy jumped on it, and now they're in the red zone. And that was a huge play in the game as well.
Yeah, so the other thing I think is a key storyline in this game are the penalties.
Yeah.
UTSA was flagged a lot of times, and there was a key kind of second quarter drive where Troy had a few calls go their way. I mean, let's be honest, there were some questionable. One of the pass interference calls was questionable, and you're talking about a situation there where that kind of swung the whole momentum or whatever of the game. And, UTSA led 12-0, and that was kind of the moment where Troy kind of began to take control of this game.
Okay, so do you know the penalty count off the top of your head? Don't look it up.
8.
Okay, so you do know, because I was going to say it felt like a lot more than 8 for 89, and I was thinking
It felt like 10 or something. Yeah.
And the reason is because they were all so critical. That touchdown drive that I just mentioned, where the Chapman interception fumble happened, they were flagged, I think it was 3 times for 39 yards, something like that, on that drive. And then on the one that they scored after Frank's interception near the goal line, Oscar Cardenas had a late hit on the return. So that set Troy up at the 22. That's 15 yards worth of penalty. And the drive that Troy kicked a field goal, UTSA had brought up 4th and 2. And I actually wrote about this incorrectly initially, and then I was checking it back after the fact here. The drive that Troy had their last field goal on, UTSA made a stop. Trevor Hermanson made the tackle to bring up 4th and 2. And before they even broke the huddle, I guess, that there was a unsportsmanlike conduct on Cyrus Simon. I thought it was like after the play But no, it was before they even got to the line, essentially. Like it was like that down was over and done with, and they had already kind of moved on to the next play. And then he must have said something or done something that was not evident from what we were able to gather. So that was costly too because it led to the field goal. So there's been a lot of there was every drive where Troy had points, there was a penalty that was involved in moving that ball down the field.
So much so the San Antonio mayor chimed in at one point on Twitter watching the game. So yeah,
Absolutely,
that, I mean,
unbelievable! What a
yeah,
move!
I mean, some of those penalties were clearly questionable, but I thought also, some of the unsportsmanlike stuff was, I mean, it was part of the flow of the game and clearly had an impact in extending some of these drives, right?
Yeah, no doubt. And I think that there were a lot of other cases where either UTSA's defense was playing extremely well and just kind of forcing either three and outs or keeping Troy under wraps. I mean, they ended up with 169 total yards, Troy's offense did, and it was the fewest UTSA's ever allowed in a loss. It was like sixth fewest ever, something like that. And the fewest they've ever allowed in a game that they didn't end up winning. And you could see why. I mean, when Troy punched in that touchdown to take the lead, I think that was in the third quarter, they only had 90 yards.
Yeah.
And it was so weird to feel like they were ahead. I was going to still be writing my story of the like this is UTSA's wins the game version. I didn't start that they would lose the game version until way later. It just felt like they were in control and they were going to pull it out eventually the way they always do.
Yeah, I think it was Mike Finger who said, "How is UTSA losing this game?" Right when Troy took the lead, and I mean, for much of at least early on, it felt like UTSA was in control. The defense was dominating up front, but offensively, Troy's defense was as good as advertised. I think that may be kind of an underrated fact of this game that they won in the trenches against UTSA's offensive line and really, I think we saw a combination of things on the offense. Let's get right down to the brass tacks with the offense. I mean, they were down Joshua Cephas due to undisclosed reasons. You have a first-time offensive coordinator with Justin Burke, and Frank Harris just wasn't as sharp as we've seen him. So all of that kind of led to one of the worst offensive performances of the season. Honestly,
Yeah,
in this game.
and don't forget also that it's all the injuries that have been mounting through the year
Right.
too. To not have JT Clark and to have them make it that far without that being evident, and to not have potentially the two starters at offensive tackle with Mekhi Hart and Demetrius Allen, and to be able to
One
cover
running back, one healthy running back.
right, and then Kevorian Barnes. I mean, I thought that right after he ripped off that 53-yarder, I think they gave it to him on first and goal from the
Right.
5. I would have to watch it back again to be sure, but it felt like he might have still been catching his breath. I don't think he
Yeah,
had the finish
he's
on
got a
that run.
gas.
He normally would. And then it's 3 straight incomplete passes from there. And Chris Carpenter, who when you talk about the injuries, a guy who wouldn't have been on the field otherwise, to be honest, Chris Carpenter had the critical drop on, I don't remember if it was second and goal or third and goal, but he was wide open in the back of the end zone. And so I think that you do see the cumulative effect of all those injuries is immediate in the newer ones as well. It just adds up through the year. And I hesitate to put too positive of a spin on it because you don't want to come off like a homer or whatever. But the way they've been able to adapt to all these things through the year, when you see when it doesn't work, it's a reminder of how impressive it was that they navigated it as well as they did up to this point, I think.
Yeah, I mean, really, without knowing the full situation, it seems like just the Cephas missing was kind of the straw that broke the back. I mean, they've been able to overcome all these guys, and you even look at losing Brendan Brady and for the championship game, and it's like they've able to reload and have guys step up and still be able to win. But this last one guy missing seemed like, I mean, if Cephas plays, it might be a different outcome, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could say that probably about obviously if
Any
JT
one of
was,
the guys, yeah.
yeah, I do think that probably more than just that one absence being the one that put it over the top. I would say it's the toughest defense they've run up against. I think
Yeah.
that's probably what exposed a lot of these different things that might have been bubbling under the surface for a while. More than just one last absence was too much. I think they've proven that whatever it is, they'll adapt to it and try to do things different ways to get around it. I mean, aside from the drop, they got pretty decent production out of Chris Carpenter. Like
Right.
if he makes that catch, it's the Chris Carpenter game, as you might say. So
Yeah.
I think that that's not, I don't want to put it all on, well, Cephas wasn't there, and that's the reason that they couldn't get it done. I think it's the cumulative everybody, and then it's the fact that this is probably the hardest defense they had to go up against.
Is that even including Texas? Was this the toughest defense they faced all season?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean,
They played different competition, so
it's a
right,
competition. Certainly, statistically, Troy's going to look better, but Texas is just going up against harder teams. And that game was so long ago, I can't remember
right.
necessarily if like Texas down to down played them any better or worse. It felt like at times UTSA could move the ball against Texas, and maybe similarly there were a couple costly missteps or things here and there that didn't connect. So that's a really tough comparison to make, but I think it's fair to say Troy's at least top two. I don't know if there's anybody else you would consider.
Yeah, I want to also give a shout out to UTSA's defense. It seemed like early on, especially when the turnovers kind of happened four straight times or however five, however you want to break it down. UTSA's defense did pretty good in those sudden change situations, holding Troy down, but just seemed like eventually they wore down just having to be on the field so much. And I mean, that wasn't a great Troy offense, but they certainly held them under wraps today.
Yeah, we talked about the yardage total quite a bit, and I think it's also noteworthy that UTSA had 6 sacks, which is tied up for a record. And Trey Moore had 2 and ended up getting 3.5 tackles for loss, I believe, to set a new single season record, breaking a Marcus Davenport record. Anytime you can break a Marcus Davenport record, you're doing something right. I was trying to look up here, can't find it right now. I don't know. Troy only ran 64 plays. UTSA ran 74. I felt like they were getting off the field so fast defensively a lot of the times that I don't really know if they necessarily wore down. It was probably just only a matter of time before they couldn't continue to hold guys at as high of a level as they were, whether it was fatigue or just because it's just hard to do that again and again and again. But it wasn't, I think Jeff said it was the best defensive performance he's been here. And I think I'd have to look back. There's probably a lot of times that they beat up on some lesser competition, and you can slice that up however you want. But generally, I think it had to be one of the better games that I've seen UTSA's defense play for how long that they were able to keep this team in the game. And then you think about one of the 2 times that Troy got in the end zone, it was that really, really short field, and the other times, all those things we ran down that they could have got out of there.
So, Greg, the Roadrunners close the season with 11 wins, 3 losses, another historic season for the Roadrunners in 2022. It's just kind of a bad ending to a really, really good season, right? I mean, it doesn't kind of change anything with the overall season, but it seemed like they were really, really focused on trying to get this win for a couple of different reasons, and they just couldn't pull it out. I mean, one more big play here and there might have changed things, but in the end, I mean, Troy kind of just did what made just enough plays to down UTSA today.
Yeah, it's interesting. I find myself very often comparing it to last year's bowl game, and you ask anybody on the team, and it's a reasonable answer to say that it's just because they were without 25 guys last year for a variety of reasons that they maybe looked kind of flat in that game or just didn't have enough in the tank to be able to hang with a pretty strong San Diego State team. But I do also think that on top of that, there was a level of we've just had this crazy year and we bounced back from North Texas and won the conference championship. And there was probably a lot of complacency that might have come with that. And
Right,
I don't know if they
right.
were hungry to win the bowl game last year. And I know even in that post game, they did seem pretty down. They did seem a lot like it was a loss in an important game. But this year, I think it felt a little bit different. And that could just be me, thinking it's different when it's not. But it did feel like because they had been there, done that with the conference championship. And they said that this week that sort of winning is the expectation now. So they're not showing up to this bowl game wanting to pat themselves on the back because they just don't. That feels like they met their expectations rather than did this crazy thing that no one could have seen coming. So in that sense, it felt like they probably approached this bowl game with a little bit more of a level head. And I spent some time this week wondering if Troy would be the way UTSA was last year, where they had gone something like 5-7 in that range the last 2 or 3 years before this one, and then had this crazy season with a long win streak and a conference championship. And were they going to show up here and just kind of want to celebrate what they'd already accomplished? And I think Troy obviously showed up ready to play at a high level, and I think UTSA did as well. But maybe it is kind of similar to last year where they just ran out of guys. It wasn't all at once and it wasn't for a lot of the same reasons, but the cumulative effect was that they just didn't have, I think, enough in the tank to be able to hang with Troy. And then on top of the kind of more uncharacteristic mistakes, or if you want to blame the officials, that's up to you. And, all these different things that were unlucky breaks along the way as well.
Yeah, I think it's just like you said, a cumulative effect, and man, it's unfortunate the UTSA just didn't have their guys. It's one thing if you go down with all of your horses and you leave it on the field, but I think even with not having all their players available, that they probably feel like they let this one slip away because UTSA takes the field down one score late in the game, and how many times have we seen that come out in the Roadrunners' favor this
Oh
season?
yeah, absolutely. And it was funny because the first play of that last drive was a play to Cardenas.
Oscar, yeah,
It's like, oh, every time they're going to do
here
something
we
crazy,
go, here we
they're
go
going to
again.
Oscar at some point, and that felt like it could have been a play that got him going. And I didn't watch the replay of that last pass to Zakari on fourth down. I mean,
It looked close.
you could break down any play you want. I don't know if he dropped it and should have had it, but it looked like a good defensive play to me. So they were still pretty close to being able to pull off that kind of magic that we've seen from them before. It just wasn't totally there this time. And you talked about it would have been nice to see if they had all their guys in this game. It would have been nice to see if they had all their guys all season. And
Yeah.
nobody gets through a full football season healthy, so that's an unrealistic. But well, maybe they did last year for the most part, but that's an unrealistic bar to set. So it's hard to really feel like you can compare them to other teams at full strength because it just doesn't play out like that. But if this team could have avoided some of those major injuries, they were already this year better in a lot of ways than last year. I like to look at the S&P Plus just as the catch-all metric for team performance in a season, and they were outpacing last year's team. And so imagine if not just what they were able to accomplish, but adding all of these different pieces back into the mix where they could have ranked nationally if they would have been farther up the top 25 or, whatever the case may be. So I think it's really interesting. We'll never know. It's kind of just going to hang out there. But I think the thing that they can take solace in is that they, when you factor all that in, had to feel like they exceeded expectations because any one of those injuries could have been crippling to a team season and they did not let it derail them.
Greg, it's been a long, kind of eventful week here in Orlando. I'm excited to go home early tomorrow morning. What are some of your big takeaways? Obviously, um, early on in the week, we learned that Jeff Traylor lost his father, and that was kind of a big talking point early in the week. And kind of later in the week, it seemed like the team was a little bit more focused on this game. And to me, those are the two biggest things coming out of this week. Just how it seemed like the team sort of rallied around Coach Traylor and his brother Kurt, and how they use that as a talking point to try and you know get embrace the moment and have proper respect, but also try and get this win here this week.
Yeah. I said this a few times in private conversations with different people, but this week's been a lot of emotional whiplash, I guess I would say, because we are like this. It's been wonderful being here. Like for anybody, I imagine most of the people viewing this were not part of this game week experience, didn't have the opportunity to come to Orlando, but it's a pretty remarkable setup in that the team hotel and the adjoining hotel that has a lot of the staff and all that other stuff, they're all within walking distance from the Universal theme park, and they have all these different bars and restaurants around there, nice little city walk area they call it. And so you really are, and like there's water and little boat rides and all this. Like it's a very, very nice scenic area, and it's every bit the getaway and the vacation that made this an enticing bowl for them to want to go to. And the reason that was sort of a priority over finding another game in the Dallas area for the third year in a row. But at the same time, as you're enjoying all these vacation kind of elements and they're going to the amusement park and stuff, we spent a lot of time this week talking about death. I mean, it's a bowl for cancer research. So we revisited a lot of stuff with Rashad Wisdom and his brother Bryce, and Mike Leach's death was kind of hanging over the world of college football earlier in the week. And we ended up talking to Jeff about that for a brief bit there. And then obviously the story with Jeff and his father was bigger than either of those two in terms of how much that became a focal point this week. So it was a very, very weird juxtaposition of the emotions going on this week. And I honestly think that I probably thought about that more than the team did. It felt like they had those two things in separate buckets and handled that pretty well. I don't know that really had an impact. And it felt like, honestly, I thought it was interesting because Jeff mentioned that they talked about dads in one of the team meetings. I guess it was probably Monday or Tuesday, but it didn't feel like there was a tie to football. You know what I mean? Like it didn't really feel like it was changing any. And he said this in one of the press conferences. It doesn't really change like the lessons that they teach the guys or anything. It was just like, let's talk about this today. I don't think it really was like a new element to their culture or something that they brought on the field that didn't feel like, nobody ever said, hey, we're playing this game for Billy Traylor or anything like that. That was not, I don't think that really became a talking point. I feel like they kept those things separate. And I don't know if anybody out there can decide whether that's a good or a bad thing. It's just, I feel like the way they approached it is that it wasn't necessarily a big part of the game preparation and the on-field part. And that's an interesting way to handle it.
Yeah, big emotional week, I think, too. I'd agree with that take in Orlando, Greg. I think we had interviews also, lots of work interviews every day
Yeah,
this week. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, we
I,
got it in.
I thought I was going to go have a fun day at the Universal Parks on Thursday, and we decided around the pep rally with no humans at it for some
Yeah,
reason that
there
we
were
would.
lots of humans though. That
Well,
it's
okay, no
possible.
fans. The closed pep rally, which doesn't make any sense to me still. And we did some interviews after that. So, rest assured, people out there, I got to spend a couple hours speedrunning Universal, so I at least got to see it while I was here. If anybody out there was worried, but yes,
Closing thoughts, Greg. What was your? Did you do any rides? What was the best attraction there you
no,
saw?
no, I really didn't have time for that. It was
Yeah,
closing. I had to run through everything, but I'm big into all the Harry Potter stuff. Did you get to do it?
I,
You went
I
one
I
of
went on one ride, being I got motion sickness on a 3D ride,
the 3D stuff is a definite no go. I
and
can't
then it
do
rained, so I
it.
called it a day, and then we hit the pep rally. So, uh,
Not to be mistaken, it was a very fun week. I think I hope you enjoyed yourself as much as I did. I was glad to be here. It was a very true bowl experience. I think
yep.
from very different from the last couple of years, where either it was COVID or it was just somewhere that wasn't really a destination that it was. So it'll be interesting to see. Presumably, UTSA will be making decisions on bowl games for years to
Yeah.
come. So we'll see whether they opt for something like this, or if we I actually don't even know what the AAC lineup looks like. That's a whole other thing to try to get a grasp on. But it'll be interesting to see how they choose that going forward. I think the idea of doing it somewhere that the guys were excited about being probably helped them out this week, even if the result on the field wasn't what they wanted.
Well, Greg, I think that'll wrap it up for now. I think we'll be back maybe next week or after that signing day. Signing day's coming up this coming
Oh,
Wednesday.
yeah.
Yeah, so we'll see how that goes. But until then, Greg Lucas, San Antonio Express News. Be sure to check out his special UTSA section there. I'm JJ Perez, Inside Runner Sports. Thanks everyone for watching. Appreciate it.